It was a cold April morning in 1933 when Martha Henderson woke up, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Like millions of Americans, she kept her savings in gold coins, hidden in a biscuit tin under her bed. Her husband had died in the First World War, and those golden coins were all she had left to secure her future. But on that day, April 5th, 1933, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt would sign one of the most controversial executive orders in American history, Executive Order 6102. With the stroke of a pen, Roosevelt made it illegal for American citizens to own gold. Within weeks, Martha and millions like her would be forced to surrender their precious coins to the government, under threat of a $10,000 fine or 10 years in prison. This is the story of how the United States stole gold from its own citizens, and what Americans lost forever on that fateful day in 1933. Subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments what you think about this. The setting, the Great Depression. To understand why Roosevelt took such a drastic step, we need to go back to the early 1930s. America was drowning in the worst economic crisis in its history. The stock market crash of 1929 had triggered a devastating domino effect. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Unemployment soared to levels never seen before. John Miller, a factory worker in Detroit, lost his job at Ford in 1931. Like many Americans, he distrusted the banks and kept his savings in gold coins. "At least gold will always be worth something," he used to tell his wife. He had no idea how wrong he was. At that time, the United States operated under the gold standard. Every US dollar could be exchanged for a fixed amount of gold, about 1/20th of an ounce per dollar. This system gave confidence to the currency, but it also limited the government's ability to print money to fight the crisis. When Roosevelt took office in March 1933, he faced an unprecedented banking run. Desperate Americans rushed to withdraw their money and convert it into gold. In just 1 week, more than $100 million in gold left the Treasury's vaults. The American financial system was on the brink of total collapse. The decision to confiscate. That was when Roosevelt and his economic advisors made a decision that would change America forever. Henry Morgenthau Jr., Secretary of the Treasury, and other members of Roosevelt's Brain Trust, argued that the only way to save the economy was to break the link between the dollar and gold. But there was a problem. Millions of Americans owned gold. If the government devalued the dollar against gold, those citizens would profit enormously, while the government would bear the losses. The solution? Confiscate the gold first. On April 5, 1933, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. The short document ordered that all Americans turn in their gold coins, bullion, and certificates by May 1, 1933. In exchange, they would receive paper money at the fixed rate of $20.67 per ounce of gold. The official justification was that hoarding gold and gold certificates affects the public interest, and that such hoarding was contrary to the best interests of all citizens. But the reality was far different. The government was about to carry out the largest confiscation of private property in American history. William Woodin, then Secretary of the Treasury, would later admit in his memoirs, "We knew it was a draconian measure, but we believed it was necessary to save the country from total economic ruin." The execution of the confiscation. The news spread like wildfire. Newspapers across the country ran dramatic headlines. Government bans ownership of gold. Citizens must turn in gold by May 1. For Martha Henderson, whom we mentioned earlier, the news came from her neighbor, who heard it on the radio. She ran under her bed, grabbed her biscuit tin, and counted her $15, $20 gold coins, her only financial security. Tears ran down her face as she realized she had no choice but to hand them over. The collection process was meticulously organized. Federal banks in every major city became collection points. Long lines formed outside, with citizens carrying bags, suitcases, even wheelbarrows full of gold. It was a surreal scene, Americans being forced to surrender their savings to their own government. James Thompson, a small business owner in Chicago, described the experience in his diary. "Today I turned in the 50 gold coins my father left me. The bank clerk barely looked at me as he weighed them. In return, I got a handful of paper notes. I feel as though I was robbed in broad daylight, but by my own government. Not everyone complied quietly. Some Americans hid their gold, burying it in backyards or locking it in secret safes. Others tried to flee to Canada or Mexico with their reserves. But the risks were enormous. Being caught meant a $10,000 fine, equivalent to more than $200,000 today, or up to 10 years in prison. Frederick Barber Campbell, a New York lawyer, became the most famous case of resistance. He publicly refused to turn in his gold coins, arguing that the executive order was unconstitutional. Campbell was prosecuted by the government and eventually lost the case, but his defiance inspired others to question the legality of the measure. The Great Betrayal. What happened next was even more shocking. Just 8 months after forcing Americans to hand over their gold at $20.67 an ounce, Roosevelt signed the Gold Reserve Act in January 1934. This act officially revalued gold to $35 an ounce, an overnight increase of nearly 70%. Let's do the math. If Martha Henderson had kept her 15 $20 gold coins, they would have been worth $525 after revaluation. Instead, she received only $300 in paper money. The government had effectively stolen $225 from her, and that was just the beginning. The revaluation of gold allowed the government to create money out of thin air. The U.S. Treasury pocketed billions of dollars from this maneuver, money used to fund New Deal programs. Essentially, Roosevelt financed his economic recovery by confiscating the wealth of American citizens. Dr. Murray Rothbard, economist of the Austrian school, later described this operation as the greatest robbery in American history. And he wasn't exaggerating. Conservative estimates suggest the U.S. government profited more than $2.8 billion from the confiscation and revaluation, an astronomical sum for the time. But the impact went beyond finances. The operation marked the permanent end of the gold standard for ordinary Americans. Although the government still held gold reserves for international trade, U.S. citizens would never again be able to exchange dollars for gold. Lasting consequences. The 1933 gold confiscation had consequences that echo to this day. First, it set a dangerous precedent, that the government could seize private property in times of crisis. This precedent would be invoked again in various ways throughout American history. More importantly, it marked the beginning of the era of fiat money, currency backed not by any physical asset, but only by faith in the government that issues it. Without gold to restrict money printing, the government gained virtually unlimited power to expand the money supply. The economic consequences were profound. In the 90 years since the confiscation, the U.S. dollar has lost over 96% of its purchasing power. In 1933, $20.67 bought 1 ounce of gold. Today, that same ounce costs more than $2,000. That means the dollar has lost more than 99% of its value against gold. For families like Martha Henderson's, this meant a generational loss of wealth. The gold coins she was forced to surrender for $300 would be worth more than $15,000 today. That wealth, which should have been passed down to her children and grandchildren, simply vanished. The confiscation also fundamentally changed the relationship between citizen and state. For the first time in American history, the government proved it could and would violate fundamental property rights in the name of economic emergency. Congressman Charles Lindbergh Sr., father of the famous aviator, foresaw these consequences. In 1934, he wrote, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government by the monetary dynasty will be legalized." The legacy of 1933. Today, few Americans know the story of the 1933 gold confiscation. It is rarely taught in schools and only mentioned in passing in most history books. But its impact fundamentally shaped modern America. The power of the federal government grew exponentially after 1933. Without the restrictions of the gold standard, politicians could fund wars, social programs, and massive infrastructure projects simply by printing more money. This led to an unprecedented expansion of the American state. Inflation, once rare under the gold standard, became a permanent feature of the U.S. economy. Since 1933, prices have risen almost continuously, silently eroding the wealth of the middle class. What our grandparents bought for pennies now costs dollars. But perhaps the greatest loss was the loss of trust. The gold confiscation shattered a fundamental social contract between government and people. It proved that when convenient, the government would ignore the Constitution and property rights in the name of the greater good. Trend analyst Gerald Celeni summed it up well. The 1933 gold confiscation wasn't just about gold. It was about power. It was about the government establishing that it, not you, decides what is best for your money, your property, your life. The stories of Martha Henderson, John Miller, James Thompson, and millions of other Americans in 1933 serve as a powerful reminder. Economic freedom can be lost in an instant during times of crisis. In just weeks, Americans lost the fundamental right to own real money, gold, and were forced to rely entirely on the goodwill of the government. Today, as we face new economic crises and hear calls for extraordinary solutions, it is worth remembering the words of Benjamin Franklin. Those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. The 1933 gold confiscation teaches us that economic rights are as fragile as they are precious, and once lost, they may never be regained. This is the lesson Americans lost forever on that fateful day in April 1933. Subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what you think about this.